Well, good afternoon. I hope you're here to learn about the loan repayment options and strategies if you're planning a career in public service, working either with a government agency or a nonprofit organization, because that's what I'm focusing on today. If you came today to hear general information about strategies for loan repayment, that was yesterday. Now, it doesn't mean you can't hear that seminar. It was videotaped, so you may want to watch that. But today the focus is how a career in public service might change or impact how you choose to repay your federal student loans. So I'm going to give everyone who wants a chance to walk out because they came to the wrong seminar the chance to leave. You don't have to. There's plenty of pizza, though. Also, if you did come to the seminar yesterday, in the last half of this presentation, I'm going to be basically reviewing what I talked about yesterday when I talked about the income-driven repayment options. So if at that point you'd like to leave, you're welcome to do so, although you will miss the example that shows how much debt a person might get forgiven if they qualify for public service loan forgiveness, so you might want to stick around. The slides and the other handout materials I'm going to make reference to, if they weren't available when you walked in, will be posted on the law school's website, I'm assuming in the admissions section or someplace, so you're certainly welcome to look at that as well. So having said that, let's go ahead and get started. If you're planning a career in public service, which by this we mean you're working either for a government agency, federal, state, local, or tribal, it just has to have jurisdiction somewhere in the United States, or if you're planning to work with a 501c3 nonprofit, or with an agency that is a private nonprofit, doesn't happen to have the designation of being a 501c3, but does provide a qualifying public service and has a federal tax ID number, then you may end up finding that there's some additional options available to you and benefits in terms of your federal student loans that would not be available to someone working in the private sector. And the reason for these added benefits is because typically employment in public service can result in a lower salary than if you were doing the same type of work in the private sector. And yet if you have student loan debt, you might view that student loan debt as being a financial reason you couldn't pursue a career in public service or stay in a career in public service if you began one. So what we want to do today is to talk about what are these options that really make pursuing a career in public service much more viable financially than it would have been if these programs didn't exist. And really the three programs I'm talking about are loan forgiveness options, the income-driven repayment plans, and loan repayment assistance programs. And I'm going to be focusing on the first two, because the first two relate specifically to the terms and conditions of the loans you've been borrowing in law school. The last one, loan repayment assistance, this is where some entity, perhaps the school you attended, perhaps your employer, perhaps some other jurisdictional entity, is willing to give you funds to help you make your loan payments or to assist you in making your loan payments because you're meeting some sort of requirement, you're providing some sort of a service and so forth. Those are very specific to an organization that's willing to provide that funding. Does the law school here have an LRAP? No. So you don't have an LRAP here. There are certain federal agencies that are authorized to use a portion of their funds for this purpose. There may be state agencies that are able to do so. You'll have to check with your employer to see if you might qualify for loan repayment assistance. That's simply going to mean you're not going to have to pay back all the loans with your own funds. So again, I'm not going to talk about that, but just be aware that is an added potential option that might be available to you. What I want to focus on are the first two, the loan forgiveness options, in particular public service loan forgiveness, and the income-driven repayment plans. Because quite frankly, what's making public service possible for you financially, because you have student loan debt, primarily is the fact that you have the ability to make payments based upon your income rather than the amount of your debt, the second bullet. And so we want to make sure you understand that, as well as the possibility of getting a portion of the debt forgiven. But we're going to begin with loan forgiveness, in particular the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Now, it is not the only federal loan forgiveness program that exists, but it's the biggest one, it's the most generous one, and other than the Teach Grant, it's the only one that doesn't require annual budget appropriations by Congress. There are two other loan forgiveness programs that specifically apply to people who have law degrees that are specific to the type of work you're doing. One is related to if you're working as a public defender, The other is if you're a civil legal aid attorney. Those two programs, however, are subject to annual budget appropriations, and at least in the last several federal fiscal years, there has been no money allocated to those programs, so there have not been any benefits paid out. So I'm not going to talk about those because, quite frankly, I don't think you're going to get any funding from those, and the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program is actually a more robust benefit if you qualify. So let's talk about Public Service Loan Forgiveness, and you can read along with me. The benefit is that in Public Service Loan Forgiveness, it is a federal program that provides for the forgiveness of any outstanding balance on a federal direct loan once the borrower has completed 120 months of qualifying public service while in repayment on that loan. Now, it was created in 2007 by the College Cost Reduction and Access Act, and it became effective on October 1st of 2007. And so the first month in which anybody will actually qualify for forgiveness will not be until October 1st of 2017. So no one has yet received any benefits from this program. And that will become relevant as I talk a little bit later on. Now, that doesn't mean people haven't started accumulating qualifying months to qualify, but no one's gotten the benefit yet. But it is a loan repayment benefit. It is not a loan repayment plan. You apply for this benefit once you've earned it. You don't apply for it once you enter repayment and start making payments on your loans. That's where you select the payment plan that you'd want. And you can apply for the benefit once you put in those 120 months of qualifying public service. The months do not have to be consecutive. You could take time off. You could work in the private sector. Those months in which you're not doing qualifying public service would not count. But then once you resume qualifying public service, then the months start up where you left off. But only federal direct loans are eligible for forgiveness. So it's possible that you have federal student loans that are not direct loans. And so those are loans that are not currently eligible for this particular benefit, but you could make that debt eligible by consolidating it. That's a process where you basically refinance loans by borrowing a new loan. The new loan would be a federal direct consolidation loan. Since it is a direct loan, you would convert that debt into qualifying debt for purposes of public service loan forgiveness. And we'll talk more about the consolidation process near the end of the presentation. And finally, at least under the current tax code, any amount that gets forgiven as a result of the public service loan forgiveness benefit would be tax-free. Now, what constitutes a month of qualifying public service? Because you have to put in 120 of them. Well, two conditions have to be met for a month to count. The first is that you have to be employed as a paid employee. You can't be a contractor, and you can't be a volunteer, but you have to be a paid employee of a qualifying public service organization, and you have to have made an on-time, scheduled qualifying payment on your qualifying direct loans. So it seems very clear that the word qualifying is all important. You have to have qualifying loans while performing qualifying employment while making qualifying payments. So let's look at each of those requirements. What is a qualifying loan? It's any loan that is a direct loan other than the Parent Plus loan. Now, as students, you aren't eligible to borrow the Parent Plus loan. You've been borrowing the Grad Plus or the Graduate Plus loan. It is eligible. The Parent Plus loan is not. Now, none of you really look old enough to probably have children that are actually undergraduates, and so you probably have not yet had the opportunity to borrow a Parent Plus loan. It is possible, though, that your parents borrowed a Plus loan to help pay for your undergraduate education. But those Parent Plus loans are not your loans. They are your parents' loans. So if you only have direct loans, then all of your loans are eligible. And if you're not sure, you can check to see what types of loans you have out on the National Student Loan Data System, or NSLDS, and we're going to show you where you can do that in a few minutes. But if you have non-direct loans, such as Stafford, Grad Plus, or Consolidation loans, you might have borrowed through the bank-based federal loan program, which was referred to as the FFEL, or Federal Family Education Loan Program, or if you have Perkins loans, they are federal loans where your lender is the university you were attending at the time you borrowed the loan, Or if you've been in a health professions program, such as dentistry, nursing, something like that, and you have a health professions student loan or HPSL or a loan for disadvantaged students or a nursing student loan, none of those are direct loans, but they are federal loans, and you could refinance them through consolidation to make that debt eligible if you wanted to. And to apply for the consolidation loan, you'd go out to studentloans.gov. And again, we're going to talk more about consolidation in a bit. Any questions about what constitutes a qualifying loan? All right, let's make sure you understand, though, the difference between an FFEL, Stafford Grad Plus or Consolidation Loan, and a direct Stafford Grad Plus or Consolidation Loan. You've been borrowing direct loans, unsubsidized Stafford and Grad Plus loans while you've been here at the law school, because beginning July 1st of 2010, banks and other types of financial institutions were no longer eligible to originate any new federal loans. But prior to that date, so for example, when you were an undergraduate, if you had to borrow federal loans, it is possible that the school you were attending at that time chose to use the FFEL program rather than the direct program. Many schools, when it was available, were in fact using the FFEL program rather than the direct program. And what distinguishes an FFEL loan from a direct loan is who was the original lender. In the case of the direct program, the original lender is the Department of Education, and the lender will always be the Department of Education. The department does not have the authority under the current law to sell these loans to anyone else. In the FFEL program, the original lender was a private financial institution, a bank, a credit union, a savings and loan, something like that. Now, those financial institutions actually did have the authority to sell those loans to other lenders. It didn't change the terms of the loan, but they could have transferred the ownership of the note to some other entity. And in fact, in many instances they did, particularly in the final 3 years in which these lenders could actually originate federal loans. And in the final years, the lender they primarily sold to was the Department of Education. So it's very possible that although you borrowed these loans, FFEL loans, as an undergraduate or in a prior graduate program through a commercial lender, that lender did sell them and may have in fact sold them to the Department of Education. But the fact that the Department of Education is now the holder of that loan did not convert it into a direct loan, because the promissory note remained intact and it was an FFEL note. So it still is an FFEL loan. It would still have to be consolidated to make it eligible for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. The other thing you need to note for both types of loans is that it's very common for the lender to use a third party or a contractor, what we call a servicer, to actually manage the loans. And it's possible that over time, the servicing has been transferred from one servicer to another. When loans are transferred from one servicer to another, it is not that the ownership of the loan has changed. The lender hasn't changed. It's just that your lender has chosen to transfer the loans to a different servicer. And it's not the servicer that matters. It's who the lender is. Questions about this? All right. If you're not sure what types of loans you have, as I mentioned, the best source is the National Student Loan Data System. This is a centralized database that has been created by the U.S. Department of Education that allows you to see all the federal student aid you've ever received, both in terms of federal loans as well as federally funded grants. And so if you're not sure, the one place where you could look to see all of the federal loans you have and then to determine do you have any non-direct federal loans would be NSLDS. To get to NSLDS, all you have to do is go out to nslds.ed.gov. And if you have your laptops with you right now, you're welcome to do that right now. To access your information, you'd have to enter in, after you click the Financial Aid Review option, your Social Security number, the first 2 letters of your last name, your birth date, and the PIN that you've been using to fill out the FAFSA. If you don't remember your PIN, you can get a duplicate PIN out at the PIN website, pin.ed.gov. One brief comment about the PIN. In April of this year, the government is going to be transitioning from using a PIN method to authenticate your identity, because that's why you use the PIN. It's authenticating who you are when you're trying to access your information online. They're going to be moving away from using a PIN method to the more commonly used method of a user ID and password. Now, you don't need to worry about that right now. There's nothing you need to do about it right now. The first time you try to access NSLDS or any other federal website that would require you to enter your PIN, when the PIN is no longer the method you use to authenticate your identity, they will immediately link you to the site where you can establish your user ID and password, and it will be available for you to use immediately. There won't be any delay in your using it. So just be aware that moving forward, that's going to change, and that will be important to all of you that are planning to do public service, because you're going to have to at least every 12 months go out to studentloans.gov, and to do that you have to use your PIN to apply for the income-driven repayment plan you want to use. And so you will be having to use the PIN and then subsequently the user ID and password, so just be aware of that coming change. Now, once you log in, and right now we're looking at my information on NSLDS because unfortunately there is not a demonstration site. But I wanted to be able to show you the details of this site so you could see where you could get the information I think you need to obtain. And when I was getting my PhD in economics, I did have to borrow a few federal student loans, but I was in school before most of you were born. And things were a lot cheaper then. I was also going to a public institution. I went to Washington State University, so I didn't have to borrow very much, and it is all paid off. But the reason I'm showing you this is so that you can see where do you look to find out if you have non-direct loans. And it's on this initial screen under the column type of loan. If the name of the loan does not start with the word direct or include the word direct as part of the name, then it is not a direct loan. If it does not include the word direct as part of the name, then it is not a direct loan. It may or may not say that it's an FFEL loan. These are FFEL loans, but it doesn't indicate so. Perkins loans are not direct loans. So if it does not include the word direct, then that is a loan that you would have to consolidate to make that debt eligible for purposes of public service loan forgiveness. Questions about that? Now, if you wanted to learn more information about your federal loans, because there's a lot more information out on this site, you see it says you can click on the number in the first column to see the details. So if you clicked on any of these blue boxes, it would then open up the details for that specific loan that would tell you, for example, who is the current servicer of the loan and who is the current lender, what is the current interest rate, when did the loan enter or when is it scheduled to enter repayment, what is its current status, and so forth. Any questions about what constitutes a qualifying loan and how you could determine whether or not your loans are all eligible? All right. Now let's go to the next topic, qualifying employment. It's a bit more complicated. Qualifying employment requires that you must be paid as a paid employee, not a contractor and not a volunteer, and you have to be full-time. You could be part-time, which we'll address in just a minute. But you have to be a paid employee of either a government agency with jurisdiction somewhere in the United States. It could be federal, it could be state, local, or tribal. It doesn't have to be at any particular jurisdictional level, but it does have to have jurisdiction somewhere within the United States. So it would not include foreign government, employment by a foreign government agency. It could be a 501c3, or it could be other qualifying private nonprofits that provide public services but are not a 501c3 but also have a federal tax ID number. Now, in terms of government employment, there's only one type of government employment that would not be considered qualifying employment, and that is if you are an elected member of the U.S. Congress. So if you're a U.S. House of Representative or a U.S. Senator, you are not eligible. They exempted themselves from getting this benefit. But staff members working for a U.S. House of Representative or a U.S. Senator, as long as you're employed by the federal government or state government, then you're eligible. And any other elected official at any other jurisdictional level is eligible. So, the president, the vice president, cabinet members, anybody else is eligible. It's only elected members of U.S. Congress. As far as a 501c3, here the only type of employment that wouldn't qualify is related to what you would be doing. If your primary work responsibilities would involve religious instruction, conducting worship services, or proselytizing, then that would not constitute qualifying employment. However, if your employer was a religious organization, but your work responsibilities did not involve those activities, at least primarily, then that would still be qualifying employment. And finally, in terms of other qualifying private nonprofits, you cannot be working for a political organization that lobbies on behalf of issues, nor can be you employed by a labor union. Otherwise, anything else would qualify. Full-time employment is defined as the greater of 30 hours per week, or what your employer defines as full-time. Now, part-time employment also counts as long as you're working at least an average of 30 hours per week across your part-time public service positions. And it could be just one part-time position as long as you were working at least 30 hours per week, or it could be multiple part-time public service positions as long as the total number of hours across those part-time positions was at least 30 hours per week. And again, you'd have to be a paid employee of each of those organizations. And it does not matter if you're moonlighting on the side. In either case, moonlighting doesn't exempt you from qualifying. It's just that you can't count the moonlighting employment as qualifying employment. Now, a couple other things to note. It's not what you're doing that matters. You don't have to be working as an attorney. It's who you're working for. Who are you technically employed by that matters. And again, only religious instruction, conducting worship service, or proselytizing would likely be the types of employment that wouldn't qualify you. The physical location of your employment does not matter. You could be working outside of the United States as long as you're employed by a qualifying public service employer that is either a government agency with jurisdiction within the United States or it's a nonprofit with tax standing as a nonprofit within the United States. The 120 months don't all have to be with the same employer. I said they didn't have to be consecutive, but they also don't all have to be with the same employer. So you could work for different public service employers over that 120-month span of time. All right? Now, if you have more questions about what might constitute qualifying employment, the best source of getting answers would be one of two places. Either to look at the FAQs that the Department of Education has posted out on the website that they've set up for information about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which is studentaid.ed.gov/public service, or you could call the contractor that's been designated to manage the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program for the Department of Education. That's one of the companies that services direct loans. It's Fed Loan Servicing, and this is the toll-free number they've established specifically about questions related to public service. If Fed Loan Servicing is your servicer and you had general questions about the servicing of your loans, that would not be the number to call. This is only the number you would call if you have specific questions about whether or not specific types of employment would be considered qualifying employment. Now, this might raise a couple of questions. For example, and this is addressed in the FAQs, what if you're working for an organization like the United Nations? Would that be considered qualifying employment? Well, the United Nations is not a government agency with jurisdiction within the United States, and it doesn't have status as a nonprofit within the United States. So if your employer is the United Nations, that would not be qualifying public service. On the other hand, if you're assigned to the United Nations by the United States, if you're basically a part of the U.S. mission at the United Nations, then technically your employer is the U.S. State Department. So in that instance, it would be qualifying employment. What if you're working for a nonprofit that is international in scope, such as Doctors Without Borders? That is actually a French-based nonprofit organization, but it has a U.S.-based subsidiary, Doctors Without Borders, that has a 501c3 designation within the United States. So as long as you're employed by the U.S.-based 501c3, even if you're working in some other part of the world, then that's considered qualifying employment. Questions about qualifying employment? All right. What is considered a qualifying payment? Well, it's payments made either using the income-driven options, which are pay-as-you-earn, income-based repayment, and there are now two versions of income-based repayment, or income contingent repayment, or the only other payment plan that would automatically count as a qualifying payment would be the standard 10-year repayment plan. But if that's the plan you're using to repay your loans, the loans will be paid off in 10 years, so there wouldn't be any debt left to forgive. Now, if you have the typical amount of debt that law students have and are earning the typical salary that someone with a law degree who's doing public service might be earning, then likely the standard repayment plan would be more than what you'd have to pay under the income-driven option you're eligible for, and likely could be an unaffordable amount. So I don't think that will be an issue. But there are three other payment plans. There's the graduated 10-year plan and the two extended plans, and those plans do not in and of themselves result in a qualifying monthly payment. The only way payments made under those options would qualify is if the amount you're paying is equal to the 10-year amount, which in those plans, at least initially, your monthly payment would be less than that. So those would not be qualifying payments. Similarly, if you have a consolidation loan already and you're on a standard repayment plan, in that case, the standard plan you're on is not based on a 10-year amortization. It's likely based on an amortization that is more than 10 years. In that case, then the monthly payments would not count. Because if you're on a standard plan, it has to be the standard 10-year option, not the longer options that are available with consolidation loans. Now, any questions about the income-driven options? I will tell you, though, in a minute, I'm going to go into a lot more details about the income-driven options, so you may want to wait. All right, so what are the benefits or the pros of public service loan forgiveness versus the costs, the negatives, or the cons? Well, obviously, the benefits are, number one, it increases the financial feasibility of pursuing a career in public service or public interest law if you have student loan debt, because a portion of your qualifying federal student loan debt could end up being forgiven, and under the current tax code, that would be a tax-free benefit. So it's essentially, you'd be getting a federal grant or a federal scholarship. And it's an entitlement, which means that it's not subject to annual budget appropriation. Therefore, if someone's earned the benefit has to be paid out, whether or not Congress has allocated funds for that purpose or not. And a lot of federal benefits programs are subject to budget appropriations. The biggest one related to financial aid is the federal Pell Grant. Right now, the government is authorized to give much bigger Pell Grants than the Congress has authorized in terms of funding. But the good news with public service loan forgiveness, we don't have to wait for Congress to allocate funds for the purpose because it's an entitlement. What are some of the negatives? Well, it's an all-or-nothing benefit. You either have to put in the full 120 months and then apply for the benefit, or you get nothing. You can't put in 119 months or less and get a partial benefit. Well, so that means you've got to stick it out. And that creates one of the risks because, although you may have a lot of interest in doing public service, you can't be certain that you'll have that interest long term. You may decide at some point to move to the private sector, and if you've done so before you've earned the benefit and you've put in the full 120 months, you're not going to get any benefit. Secondly, only direct loans are eligible, which means if you have non-direct loans that you want to make eligible, you're going to have to consolidate them. But therein lies a potential problem if you have Perkins loans. And that's because Perkins loans have a benefit specific to that type of loan that's related to cancellation. In other words, if you're doing specific types of qualifying employment, and here it's the type of work you're doing, not who you're working for, you could end up having your Perkins loan canceled within 5 years without paying back any of it. And that is a better benefit than you could get if you consolidated the Perkins and then ended up qualifying for public service loan forgiveness. Because with public service loan forgiveness, you have to be paying back the loan over 10 years, and then you might get the balance forgiven. But with the cancellation benefit, you might not pay any of it. And as individuals who are getting a law degree, there are two specific types of employment that might qualify you for the cancellation benefit in the Perkins program. And that's if you were planning to work as a prosecuting attorney, prosecuting criminal cases, or you were working as a public defender. Because in those two types of work, you're considered a law enforcement officer. And one of the cancellation benefits or provisions is if you are a law enforcement officer. And if you're planning to do that type of work, then it would be better not to consolidate the Perkins, because if you consolidate the Perkins, in other words, if you refinance them and pay them off, then you no longer have those loans and you no longer would be eligible for that benefit, because that is a benefit that is only available for Perkins loans. So if you do have Perkins loans, either that you've borrowed while you've been here at the law school or from some prior degree program, before you decide to consolidate them, I'd encourage you to call the school that you borrowed them from or whoever they've designated to service those loans and ask them, based upon what you're planning to do, would you qualify for any of the current cancellation benefits in the Perkins program? Because if you would, then you might decide not to consolidate them. If you wouldn't, then it certainly would probably be the better option to go ahead and refinance the Perkins so that now at least that debt would be eligible for forgiveness through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Any questions about that? All right. Because there are other reasons you might get them canceled related to employment activities, but none of the others are related to requiring you to have a law degree. But they're all related to doing some sort of a public service type activity. The other issue about public service loan forgiveness, and it's probably the biggest issue you need to be concerned about, is the fact that the program could be changed or eliminated through statutory changes by Congress. If you review the promissory notes for the direct loans you've taken out carefully, you'll see that the public service loan forgiveness benefits are included as terms of the loan. But you'll also notice that it does allow for the possibility that those terms or those benefits are subject to statutory change. And so what changes might occur? Well, President Obama, in his 2015 budget request last year, proposed a couple of things. One, he proposed that there would be a cap on how much debt could be forgiven, and the cap he proposed was $57,500. That amount represents the maximum amount of subsidized and unsubsidized direct student loans that an undergraduate student could borrow. So that's how that number was derived. Now, that particular proposal has now actually been incorporated into a bill that's been introduced in both the House and the Senate. Actually, just in the Senate, I think, at this point. Now, we don't know if that bill will get anywhere, but it is actually in pending legislation. Something else the President proposed, which is not specific to public service loan forgiveness, but would impact how much debt you might get forgiven, is that he proposed that if you are married, then we're always going to count the income of your spouse in terms of determining your income for purposes of calculating your monthly payment in the income-driven repayment options. Right now, with the income-driven repayment options, pay-as-you-earn, income-based repayment, and income-contingent repayment, if you're married but you file your federal taxes separate from your spouse, then your monthly payment in those options is only based upon your income. It does not include your spouse's income. But the President proposed that if you're married, we're going to count both incomes regardless of how you file your taxes. Now, I do not know whether or not that's actually been incorporated in entity bills yet, but it certainly is something that is out there that's being considered. Congress is also potentially going to make some changes. One change that's already been proposed, actually in several sessions of Congress, although I'm not sure it's been introduced yet in the current session, is eliminating the program altogether. Another option is they could impose income thresholds. In other words, right now, the benefit would be paid out regardless of what your income was at the time you were eligible for the benefit. But there's been some discussion that it might make sense to impose some income caps, that if your income is above a certain level at the time you're eligible for the benefit, it could be the case that given your income at that point, you really don't need the forgiveness because you have sufficient income that you should be able to manage to pay the debt back off in a reasonable amount of time. So that's a potential option. I'm not aware that that's actually been proposed yet in any legislation, but it's certainly been discussed a lot. There could be some sort of change to how long you have to be in public service to actually qualify for the benefit, or maybe they'll stagger the benefit. In other words, maybe you'll get a part of the benefit after 10 years, and then you'd have to work another 5 years, for example, to get the rest of the benefit. So again, there are certainly possibilities that there will be changes made to the way in which the benefit works that might limit the amount you might receive or eliminate your eligibility for the plan as an individual borrower. The other issue is that we don't know if existing loans and existing borrowers will be grandfathered in. If you look historically at how Congress has made changes to the federal student loan programs and how those changes have impacted existing loans and existing borrowers, the precedent has been established that they typically grandfather in existing loans and existing borrowers, so that if they make changes, the changes would only impact new loans or new borrowers. But there's nothing in the promissory notes you've signed that provides you with that legal protection. You just need to understand that there is the possibility that although you might end up earning the benefit, it might not be paid out to you in full because of these changes. The other risk is one I already mentioned, and that is if you don't stay in public service for the full 120 months, then there isn't going to be any benefit because there is no partial benefit. Any questions or comments about this? All right. So does that mean you shouldn't try to take advantage of it? No. But it means you don't want to view public service loan forgiveness as an incentive. Don't view it as the reason you'd borrow more or pay back less. View it as a safety net because that's what it was intended to do. And why do I think there are going to be changes? And when do I think those changes are going to occur? Is because of something that we've already clearly documented. I mentioned to you that the first month someone's going to get forgiveness is October 1st of 2017. And so it is my expectation that if Congress hasn't acted before November 1st of 2017, they likely will be motivated to do so by that time, because in October of 2017, the first benefits are going to be paid out, assuming there are no changes moving forward. And it's already been very clearly established that the biggest beneficiaries of this program are going to be physicians, not lawyers. But it was lawyers who the program was originally intended to serve, because it was actually legal education that got this enacted into law. But it's going to be doctors who are going to get the biggest benefit. And why? And that's because doctors, once they start working, they're working at very low salaries as residents, interns, and as fellows. And the highest paid doctors have the longest residencies. Surgeons typically are in residency up to 9 years. So if they're making payments on their student loans while in residency, they're going to be making very small payments. They're going to be counting those months, and they're not even going to be paying all the interest, so their debt's actually going to be getting bigger. Then they're going to have 1 year to go to keep making payments, where now they could be earning over $1 million a year. And their payments are not going to be comparable to that $1 million because they're going to get capped out at whatever their standard payment would have been. So after they put in the 120 months, they could end up having several $100,000 of debt forgiven tax-free, even though at that point they're earning $1 million a year. And once that becomes known by the press, they're probably going to write about it. And once they write about it, the public's going to become aware of it, and some of the public are going to be upset about that. And they're going to go to Congress and say, this is not the appropriate use of limited taxpayer dollars. And so I think that could then motivate Congress to sort of prevent that from happening moving forward. Now, how they will make changes, when they'll make changes, one can only guess, but I think you can anticipate that change will likely occur before you would qualify for the benefit. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't take advantage of it, but in order to take advantage of it, there are certain things you're going to have to do, and that's what this slide references. Number one, if you have non-direct loans, you've got to consolidate them once you've at least graduated from law school, and certainly before you start doing qualifying public service employment, so that all of your debt that you want to be eligible is in fact eligible. You don't have to consolidate the direct loans you already have. That wouldn't be important, and it wouldn't be beneficial. Then, in repaying these loans, you want to choose the income-driven option that's going to give you the lowest monthly payment, which is going to be pay as you earn if you're eligible for it because you're a new borrower, and I'll define what that means in a minute. If you're not eligible for it, then you're going to want to use the original version of IBR, or income-based repayment, to repay your direct loans. Then you need to make 120 payments on time, and by the way, you can't make 3 months of worth of payments in 1 month and have that count as 3 months. It still is only going to count as 1 month. You actually have to have 120 months of time where in each of those months you at least made your scheduled monthly payment on time for the month to count. And you can't start counting months until your loans are actually in repayment and you're required to be making payments. So you couldn't start making payments now if, for example, you're already working in a qualifying position as a law student and have the months count. And the easiest way to ensure they're going to be on time is to sign up to have the payments automatically deducted from a checking or savings account with your servicer. And if you do that, you'll get the added benefit of the interest rate on each of the loans will be reduced by 0.25%. Then keep good records with regard to your employment. But more importantly, you want to track your progress towards earning the benefit by submitting, sorry, I got too excited there, by submitting the employment certification form. Because that will allow you to start tracking your progress, but it also will allow you to start documenting that you've been doing qualifying employment with the servicer. Then once you've actually put in the 120 months, you'd apply for the benefit. Now, this employment certification process allows you to track your progress, and you can fill it out as often as you want. It's recommended that you would do it at least once every year, or whenever your jobs change, whichever is more frequent, because it's allowing you to provide documentation to prove that you've done qualifying employment. That's going to make it a lot easier applying for the benefit once you've earned it, because you won't have to go back and compile 10 years worth of employment records. That form is available from your current loan servicer, but it's also available out on studentaid.edu/public service. You would fill it out. It'll take you less than 5 minutes to fill it out, but you do have to print it out because you have to fill out your basic demographic information. Then you have to give it to your employer, and they have to provide information about the fact that you're employed by them, and that you're working at least full-time or how many hours you're working part-time and what type of organization it is, then they would give it back to you and you would mail it to Fed Loan Servicing, that servicer that's managing this particular program. They will review and process the form. If you've started accumulating eligible months of qualifying employment, then they're going to notify you of that, and if they are not currently servicing your direct loans, they're going to take over the servicing of your direct loans. Because then, once they're servicing your loans, they can evaluate, have you made qualifying payments during each of those months you were doing qualifying employment? And if you have, then they'll let you know how many months you've actually accumulated towards the 120-month requirement for each of your loans, because this is a benefit at the loan level. And so you could actually have loans that are going to be eligible for forgiveness at different points in time. Because, for example, if you had direct loans that you borrowed prior to coming to law school, and you were doing qualifying employment and making qualifying payments on those loans before you came to law school, you likely have already accumulated some eligible months on those loans, but you don't have any months yet on your law school loans. The earliest month you're going to get eligible months on their law school loans will be after they enter repayment in November, so it'd likely be December of this year. So you could have loans that are sort of not necessarily in sync with each other in terms of when they would get forgiven. Questions about this or any other questions about public service loan forgiveness? All right, I just want to quickly show you the website where you can get more information because if you're not interested in hearing about the payment plans, you may decide to leave, but I want to make sure you see this. This, by the way, is NSLDS where you could see what types of loans you have, but if we go out to the studentaid.ed.gov/public service, this is a website that they've created for information about public service. If you scroll down, here are the FAQs I talked about. Here's the fact sheet that you're going to see posted to the law school's website. And here's that employment certification form. It likely also will be posted. This is what the form looks like. All you have to fill out is your identifying information. Then you have to sign the certification statement. Then your employer fills this information out. It's very easy for them to do it. Then you would simply, they would give it back to you likely, and then you would submit it to Fed Loan Servicing. So it's an easy process, but it would be an important process you'd want to do, but it's an optional process. It's not something you'd be required to do, but it would be highly recommended that you do it. Any questions about public service? All right. So now let's quickly review the payment plans, the qualifying payment options. The difference between pay-as-you-earn and the new version of IBR is that only direct loans are eligible for these options, and your monthly payment is based upon 10% of your household's annual discretionary income. And if the debt isn't fully paid off within 20 years, either because you didn't qualify for the public service loan forgiveness or you didn't get it paid back yourself, there's also a cancellation option with the income-driven options themselves. And in this case, under pay-as-you-earn and the new IBR, the cancellation would occur in 20 years. Now, in this case, under the current tax code, the amount canceled as a result of being in the payment plan would be taxable. But to qualify for pay-as-you-earn and the new IBR plan, you have to be a new borrower, which I'll define in just a minute. If you're not a new borrower, then the other option you'd want to use would be the original IBR or income-based repayment plan, and both direct and FFEL loans are eligible for that, although remember, you're going to have to consolidate your FFEL loans to make them eligible for public service loan forgiveness. But here, the percentage of your income that's going to repayment is higher. It's 15% rather than 10%, and the cancellation benefit in the IBR plan is after 25 years rather than 20 years. So what are the additional eligibility requirements? Well, for pay-as-you-earn, you have to be a new borrower on or after October 1st of 2007. Which means either you didn't have any federal loans prior to October 1st of 2007, which if you were an undergraduate student and then immediately came into law school, it's very likely you don't have loans prior to October 1st of 2007 because you may have enrolled as an undergraduate student initially in the fall of 2008. But if you do have federal loans that you borrowed prior to October 1st of 2007, as long as they were paid off in full, before you took out your first new loan on or after October 1st of 2007, then you would also meet the new borrower requirement. If you are not a new borrower, though, then there's nothing you can do to change that fact. You can't go out and pay off the loans now. You can't go out and consolidate them to somehow solve this problem. Now, the government has already announced that they're going to be expanding the eligibility of this program to additional borrowers with some changes in federal rules. But we don't know yet what those new rules are. They're to be published in December of this year. So if you are not currently a new borrower, but once you enter repayment, as long as it's after the end of this year, you may want to contact your servicer to see, have the rules changed in a way that would make you eligible for pay-as-you-earn? Because if you are, it would give you a lower monthly payment than the alternative, which would be the original IBR plan. Now, the second bullet is something you all satisfy because you've been borrowing loans while you've been here at the law school. Now, the new IBR plan, which is exactly the same as the pay-as-you-earn plan, you have to be a new borrower as of July 1st of 2014. And none of you probably meet that requirement. But again, the pay-as-you-earn plan has exactly the same repayment terms as the new version of IBR. In fact, the pay-as-you-earn plan was modeled after this new IBR plan, but the President wanted to make it available to a larger number of borrowers. The other requirement to enter these options is that you have to be experiencing what's called a partial financial hardship. And you'll be experiencing a partial financial hardship if at the time you want to enter the plan, your monthly payment based upon your income would be less than what you would have had to pay under the standard 10-year plan at the time you entered repayment. As long as that's true, and for most of you that likely would be true, then you're eligible to enter the plan because you have a partial financial hardship. And once you're in the plan, you're never kicked out. And if you have a partial financial hardship, then under these options, your payment is based not on the amount of debt you have, but on three things: your household adjusted gross income, your household size, and the federal poverty guideline. And once you no longer have a partial financial hardship because your income is increased to the point where your monthly payment based upon your income would now be equal to or greater than the standard 10-year amount, then it caps out at that 10-year amount. It never exceeds that. And at that point, any interest that had been accruing that you hadn't paid gets capitalized. So what is household AGI? Household AGI, at least currently, is considered your AGI, and it would include your spouse's income, but only if you file a joint federal tax return. But again, that's something that could change. And what could change is that if you're married, it would also always include your AGI, because right now it would only include your spouse's AGI if you file your taxes jointly. If you file separately, it would not include your spouse's income. However, if you do file jointly with your spouse, and your spouse has federal student loan debt, then their federal student loan debt that's in repayment would also be included in the calculation to determine how much you would have to pay per month. It's always going to be better to file separately if you want the lowest possible monthly payment, except in the case where your spouse doesn't have income, because then it wouldn't be changing your income. Household size is not a function of how you file your taxes. It always includes you, and it always includes your spouse, if legally married, even if you file your taxes separately. It includes your dependent children, and these are your biological or adoptive children for whom you provide more than 50% of their support, regardless of who they may live with, and regardless of who may be claiming them as a dependent on a federal tax return. But it also includes anyone else who lives with you full-time who receives more than 50% of their support from you, such as a sibling, a parent, a domestic partner, a boyfriend or girlfriend. It doesn't matter what their relationship to you is. It just has to be the case that they live with you full-time and you're providing at least $1 more of their support than they are themselves. Any questions about household income or household size? All right, once we know that, we can define what we mean by discretionary income. And your discretionary income is not what you think is discretionary. It's defined by that portion of your household adjusted gross income that exceeds 150% of the federal poverty guideline, because a part of your income is needed to cover your basic living expenses. And the bigger your household, the more income you need. And right now, that figure would be $17,505 for a household size of 1. So it's not all that much income they're protecting. The rest of your household's adjusted gross income is considered discretionary, and so the amount you'd be paying annually under the new IBR and the pay-as-you-earn plan would be 10% of it, and the monthly amount would be 1/12 of it. Once you do all the math associated with this, your monthly payments would always be less than 10% of your household's monthly adjusted gross income. And in IBR, it would simply be 15% rather than the 10%. And this is a chart that just shows you for different levels of income what the monthly payments would be. Notice there's nothing in the chart referring to debt because that doesn't factor into the analysis other than determining the partial financial hardship. And although this chart is capped at $100,000 and a household size of 3, there are no income or household size caps, at least under the current terms of the program. The chart just couldn't include those others without making the print too small. To apply for these income-driven options, you have to apply for them 30 days before you want the loans to go into repayment in these plans, and the application is out at studentloans.gov. And then once you're in the plan, you have to reapply every 12 months, and your servicer will prompt you to do so because it's through the application that the servicer is collecting your household adjusted gross income and household size information so that they then can calculate your monthly payment. If you want to get a sense of what your monthly payments would be, you can go out to studentloans.gov, which is where you originally applied for your direct loans. You'll have to sign in, and you use the same credentials you used to sign in to NSLDS to get there. Once you sign in, it'll allow you to then go out to the repayment estimator, so you click on that. Once you go to the repayment estimator, it's going to show you what the monthly payments would be under the plans where your monthly payments based upon your debt, the standard, graduated, and extended plans. Once you enter in your income and household size information, it will then also give you estimates for the income-driven options. But also note, this is also where you could apply to consolidate your non-direct loans and where you could fill out the income-driven option. Questions about that? All right. If you have to leave, feel free to do so. I just want to finish talking about consolidation, and then we'll show you an example, and we'll be done. And remember, these slides are out on the website, and the presentation is being videotaped if you can't see the whole thing. So consolidation is where you're borrowing a new federal loan. It's a federal direct consolidation loan, and since it's a direct loan, it's a way of converting non-direct loan into qualifying debt for purposes of benefits that are available only for direct loans. But only federal student loans can be consolidated. So if you have private student loans or institutional loans, they're currently not eligible for consolidation. The interest rate is fixed on the new loan, and it's equal to the weighted average of the interest rates of the loans you're consolidating. And since it's a weighted average, not a simple average, although the interest rate is going to change, it doesn't change the interest expense of the debt. But then that weighted average gets rounded up to the nearest eighth of a percent. And because of that rounding up, it's going to slightly increase the interest expense. So that's why if you don't need to consolidate a loan, I don't think you should. And you shouldn't need to consolidate any of your existing direct loans. And again, you can apply out at studentloans.gov, but the earliest point in which you can apply to consolidate a loan is once it's at least in its grace period, or it's entered repayment, it's either in repayment, or it's been deferred, or is in forbearance. And when you apply to consolidate, if you're applying during the grace period on a loan, then you can actually indicate that you want the processing of the application to be delayed until near the end of the grace period. But remember, until your non-direct loans have been paid off and are now in the form of a direct consolidation loan, then that debt is not eligible for accumulating any months towards the forgiveness benefit. So you'd want to make sure that in terms of the timing, you had it fully funded and processed by the time you wanted to count qualifying months. And the reasons you consolidate are because you have non-direct federal loans, such as these bank-based FFEL loans, even if they've been sold to the government, your Perkins loans. And remember that this would be important to do that if you want the debt to be eligible. You may also want to consider refinancing any direct loans you borrowed before October 1st of 2007, because if you look at the promissory notes of those loans, the public service loan forgiveness benefit was not included as a term of those loans, and so you might not be protected if they are changes, but they grandfather in existing loans. So you may want to consider that as well. There are some non-public service loan forgiveness reasons, but again, they typically also relate to the situation where you have non-direct loans. The one exception to that would be if you have a direct Grad Plus loan, and at the time you applied for the loan, you had adverse credit, so you weren't eligible for the loan yourself, and you needed an endorser. If you consolidate that endorsed Grad Plus loan, you're going to pay it off, and that would release the endorser from that obligation, because there are no credit criteria related to consolidation. Any questions about consolidation? All right. I just wanted to quickly show you a sample case, and there's only one calculator that I'm aware of that would give you an estimate of what you might get forgiven through public service loan forgiveness, but unfortunately the calculator is not up to date. It includes the 2012 poverty guideline, which is going to not be give you correct estimates. It actually is underestimating the amount of debt that might be forgiven. But let's suppose you had $77,000 of federal student loan debt, and you were initially earning $48,000 in a public service position. And your household size was 1, living in Kentucky. So the initial amount of debt when you entered repayment was $77,000. Your initial salary annually was $48,000. Now we have to make an assumption about how your income and household size might be changing, because we have to look at how your payments would increase over time. So I've assumed that the income is changing at a rate of 3%. I've also assumed the poverty guideline is increasing at a rate of 3%. And I've assumed your household size isn't changing. It's staying at 1. Now, it's likely that those are not correct assumptions, so that would change the results. But with those assumptions, then the assumed adjusted gross income in the 10th year, the final year before you get forgiveness, would have increased to $62,629. And based upon those initial and final incomes, your initial monthly payment under the 15% IBR plan, the original IBR plan, would be $391 a month based on the 2012 federal poverty guidelines. Based upon the 2015 federal poverty guidelines, that monthly payment would actually be a little bit smaller because over time the poverty guidelines increase over time because we need to be protecting more of your income for your basic needs because of inflation. The final monthly payment in the 10th year, based upon that higher expected income, would have reached $510. Over the 120 months of the 10 years, you would have paid out a total of $53,728. And at that point, there would be $250 of interest outstanding because during a significant portion of that time, you weren't paying all the interest that was accruing, so it was accumulating, and so some of it wasn't even paid by the time you reached the 120-month point. You would have paid down a little bit of the principal, but most of it was still outstanding, and so the total amount that would have been forgiven would have been $71,111. Now, under the pay-as-you-earn plan, where your monthly payments would have been one-third less because it was taking only 10% rather than 15% of your household's discretionary income, the amount forgiven would have been a larger amount. Questions about this? All right. Again, just a few final comments. Remember, to benefit from public service loan forgiveness, and I certainly think you should go ahead and position yourself to take advantage of it, even though it's not a sure thing. But you're going to have to refinance or consolidate your non-direct loans. You're going to choose pay-as-you-earn to repay those all of your direct loans if you're a new borrower, and if not, then you're going to use the original IBR plan because it would give you the lowest payment that would qualify for the benefit. Then make 120 scheduled monthly payments on time while employed in a qualifying public service position. At least annually, make sure you're updating voluntarily your employment information with the servicer by filling out the employment certification form that's available from your loan servicer out or at studentaid.edu/public service. And then once you've earned the benefit, go ahead and apply for it. For more information, the best source of information for public service loan forgiveness is out on the federal website that the government's created specifically for it, the one I showed you, studentaid.edu.gov/public service, or call Fed Loan Servicing at the phone number they've provided specifically to answer questions about this program. There's other resources out on the internet that you can use, and that website that I used to calculate those estimated benefits from public service loan forgiveness was at finaid.org/calculator, and I was using the IBR repayment calculator. With that, remember, public service is certainly financially more possible for you because of these options, particularly the fact that your payments can be made based upon your income rather than the amount of your debt. An added potential benefit is that you could end up getting a portion of this debt forgiven tax-free. But view that as a safety net, not as an incentive, because it is subject to possible statutory changes that you might be subject to. But you've got to make sure that you're taking the right steps in order to position yourself and your student loans so they're eligible for the benefit, because it could be a tremendous benefit that can make pursuing a career in public service a much more viable financial option and also allow you to more feasibly achieve your other financial goals and still be successful in repaying your student loans. With that, remember, the information provided here has been posted to the law school's website. There's some other handouts available to you there. For more information, check out the websites I mentioned. And with that, good luck and congratulations to all of you on your upcoming graduation.